All right, so today's notes are going to be pretty quick, so hopefully this doesn't take too long. This is just a continuation of 7.1's notes. So today for 7.1, we're actually moving into the topic that I wanted to cover, which is adjacent and vertical angles. On the screen, I've got the definition of those two up. So adjacent angles are two angles that share a common side and have the same vertex. They're next to each other. We talked about this yesterday when we were comparing Indiana and Ohio. Indiana and Ohio are adjacent to each other because they share the same side. So I've got an example of what that looks like right here. We've got angle A and angle B. Angle A and angle B share that one side together, so that makes them adjacent. Vertical angles are angles that are opposite angles formed by the intersection of two lines. So basically all you're going to do to make a vertical angle is just draw two straight lines. Like an X has vertical angles. Vertical angles are congruent. That word congruent means equal. And so if you look at my little picture here, we've got a green angle and a blue angle. Those are actually going to be the same measurements. So we talked about this a little bit yesterday too. Vertical angles have the same measurements if they're across from each other. And so that means that this angle and this angle, whatever the number is, they're the same. And this angle and that angle have the same measurement. So that's a really important concept to remember for vertical angles. They are the same length if they are across from each other. Alrighty, so let's look at an example. So we're going to name two pairs of adjacent angles and two pairs of vertical angles in this figure. So go ahead, pause the video, use the definitions that we just talked about to give me an answer to this question. Pause the video now. So I'm only asking you to name two pairs of adjacent angles. So I'm going to say Z, W, V. Notice how I'm using what I learned yesterday to name the angle because I'm going for Z, W, V. I'm looking at this angle right here. An adjacent angle to that, I could say angle VWX to get this angle here, or I could say angle ZWY to get that angle there. Both of those would be correct answers for adjacent angles, but again, I only have to pick two pairs, so I'll just go ahead and pick these two. So as long as your two angles are next to each other, you are correct for that problem. And then we also asked for two vertical angles. So two vertical angles, I'm going to pick this one again, angle VWZ, VWZ. And across from that, the only other option is going to be XWY. XWY. So it gives me that angle there. And so that's one pair of vertical angles. The other pair that you could have named is angle VWX to get this one, and ZWY to get that one. And it's okay if your letters are written in the opposite way. So I could also say that that's angle YWZ. These two are the same angle. It's just for the first one, I was going ZWY. And for the second one, I went YWZ. And so it's just the direction you go. It really doesn't matter as long as you do not, the vertex, that W, has to be the middle letter. So you have to go in order from left to right or right to left. It doesn't really matter which way. And those are going to be your two vertical angles. So you could have said this one, or you could have said that one. And remember, those letters can be written the opposite direction. All right. Now we've got a little bit more of challenge problems. So with these, we're going to be finding the value of x. So we're going to figure out if the angles are adjacent or vertical, and then find the value for x. So if we're looking at this example 3 here, Are those angles adjacent or vertical? Hopefully you're thinking they're adjacent. Adjacent. Because it's two angles, 1, 2, that are right next to each other. And so that's going to be adjacent. You're going to figure out what we know about this example. The one thing that I know, or I guess there's two things that I know. The two things that I know is that this angle is 32 degrees. And if I look at this angle, I know that that equals 180 degrees. Since they're adjacent, if I add together my x plus my 32 degrees, that's going to give me the 180 degrees to form that straight angle, to put those two together. And so when I'm finding x, the first thing I'm going to do is make an equation, just like how I did there. I know that I'm adding these two angles together to equal 180. And so that's what I wrote. Next thing we have to do is solve for our x. So we're going to subtract 32 from both of our sides, and that goes away because 32 minus 32 gives us 0. X plus 0 is just x. And then that's going to equal on the other side. Let's see, we have to borrow, so that turns into a 7 and a 10. 10 minus 2 is 8. 7 minus 3 gives us 4. 1 minus 0 is 1. So 148 degrees. And that's going to be what our x is over here, because 148 degrees plus 32 degrees equals that total 180. For number 4, we have to remember what we talked about with the vertical angles. So this is going to be a vertical angle. Vertical. Because there's two lines and they form an intersection. At the beginning of this lesson, I told you something special about those vertical angles. See if you can figure out what x is from what I said earlier. So hopefully you remembered that vertical angles are the same if they're across from each other. And so since these two are across from each other, that means that x is going to equal 142 degrees. So there's nothing special we have to do. There's no math behind it. I guess there is math behind it, but like you don't have to make an equation like we did over here. You just have to know that vertical angles equal the same thing as long as they're across from each other. And so that's going to be our answer for number 4. For number 5, I want you to try this problem. So notice the type of angle that it is. Make sure you're adding the two things together and figure out this problem. So pause the video. This is an adjacent. So treat it just like how we did in number 3. So pause the video, try this problem out. So hopefully you decided to take 3x plus 2x because we're adding those two angles together, and that's going to equal 90 degrees because that is a total of a 90-degree angle there. We're going to have to simplify this left side because we've got two things that have the same last name. It's the same variable, and so we can put them together. 3 plus 2 gives me 5, and I'm going to keep my x. And that still equals 90. Now we have 5x equals 90. I want to get rid of the 5 because my goal is to just be left with my x. And so to get rid of that 5, since it's multiplication happening, I'm going to have to do division. So I'm going to divide by 5 on both sides, which gets rid of that 5. 5 divided by 5 leaves me with 1. 1 times x is just x. And then 90 divided by 5, let's see, 5 goes into 9 one time with a remainder of 4. 5 goes into 40. Let's see, 8 times. So that's going to be 18. Sorry, that took me a minute. And so it's going to be x equals 18. I'm not going to have a degrees on this one because it's not x equals some kind of a degree. We're substituting that x into there to get the degree. And so it's just going to be x equals 18 this time. And so that's all the problems that I'm going to go over today. If you have any questions, you can let me know. Otherwise, you are going to be doing this homework here. If you have any questions, let me know.